Can anything good come out of Nazareth? Can anything good come out of Nazareth? Can anything good really come out of Nazareth? This is the question Nathanael utters in response to the disciple Philip's passionate proclamation that yes, God had made good on God's promises. He is here, Jesus, and we've found him, and he's in Nazareth. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? It's not a genuine inquiry. It's not an incredulous statement given the current facts. It's a scoff given what Nathanael already believes to be true. You see, this is the very first time in John's gospel that testimony is met with resistance. But to classify this question as a classic case of biblical doubt is to miss the power of how people can be persuaded across time to ignore the truth of their own liberation again and again. This question, while it places a doubtful veil over Philip's testimony, is one that has been informed by the accumulation of a particular social rendering of a certain group of people throughout time. It's like dust collecting in the lungs for so long you forget what it means to breathe well. This question, it forms from years of re-articulated histories and geographies that make specific claims on places like Nazareth and people like Nazarenes. To call Nathanael's response mere ignorance is to miss the slow and insidious work of empire. The machine, the powers and principalities, whatever you want to call them, that seek always to convince each and every one of us that that mysterious other over there is the cause of your societal ills, or is the symbol of society's moral decay, or at the very least should be the object of your hatred. Meanwhile, those few elite puppet masters in power, they get to remain safe and sound and off your radar while their world continues to turn in their favor. You see, this is what resistance to the gospel looks like, beloved. It's not a talk to the hand, I don't want to hear it type of interaction, but it's a muscle memory kind of reflex. And it's predicated on years of theological and philosophical messages about who gets to be. And it emerges in flippant, thoughtless comments like, well, can anything good even come out of Nazareth? Today is MLK Sunday, where we celebrate and honor the legacy of one of the civil rights movement's most famous preachers. And it's not lost on me that on this day, probably at this very hour, some of the same political talking heads who have been systematically targeting the rights of citizens all across the nation will be selectively quoting from King's "I Have a Dream" and "Letter from a Birmingham Jail," even as they continue to celebrate their recent attacks on higher education, critical race theory, affirmative action, and the first Black female president at an Ivy League institution. You see, what they will do is bear witness to a man who lived and died and had some good words while he was here, but they will forget that he too was not only a preacher, but a scholar, one who was active in these very institutions, steeped in higher education himself, who walked these streets of Boston with a Bible in one hand, yes, but with the textbooks of history, philosophy, theology, literature, poetry in the other. They will forget that it wasn't a message of peace and love that got him assassinated on April 4th, 1968 at 6:01 p.m. in Memphis, Tennessee. It was his work and wisdom and insistence that the greatest threat to our liberation is not mean people needing to play nice. The greatest threat to our liberation is the storied ways people have been taught who and how we get to be in this world. Those books, that education, the way he unpacked the American double helix of white supremacy and capitalism as he advocated for the economic rights of Black sanitation workers, was the ministry, was the movement, was the threat to power, to empire, was the gospel. But for many who will remember this not, this weekend's political circus will not seem to be a conundrum at all. Call it ignorance, call it apathy, call it the sanitization of MLK. All across the country, people will hear liberative words, but they'll sound no more rousing than radio static, because legacy devoid of context is no legacy at all. Truth-telling devoid of history is nothing more than fairy tale. Trauma researcher Judith Herman says it like this: in the absence of strong political movements for human rights, the active process of bearing witness inevitably gives way to the active process of forgetting. Translation: because it's too painful, too messy, too incriminating to know why we do it, I'll say your name again and again, but I cannot do the work to speak why. And I will not change the social conditions that made it so in the first place. We can bear witness to the testimonies before us, but without more work behind us, like Nathaniel, we will so easily forget one another, who we get to be to each other, where we have been, what we have been through, and who we have the capacity to become. Can anything good really come from Nazareth? Now, lest we pull a muscle hopping on our high horses as we gallop away from the notion that we cannot be Nathaniel in this story, hear me when I say, we reflexively respond to the world around us each and every day in ways that place us in direct opposition to a gospel of love and liberation. Like Nathaniel, we have accumulated stories, myths, messages that have become muscle memories, that order our steps in ways that would rather we not see Jesus when he is waiting for us just over there. The biggest lie that anyone could ever sell you is that you are a collection of rationalized thoughts waiting to be acted upon. that the way you move in the world is through reason alone, and that the things you say and the choices you make are all perfectly rational, logical things to do. But you know as well as I do, beloved, that when that church or that preacher or that person convinced you all those years ago that your misfortune was your fault alone, or that you were condemned, or that you were unworthy, unloved, unchosen in the eyes of God, it wasn't theological concepts like sin and blameworthiness and salvation and election that you toyed with in your head for years afterward. Those things, they lived in your body, embedded in your flesh, like stories written about who you are and what capacity you now had to thrive. And these things changed the way you moved, the way you walked, how you believed you could carry yourself, the possibilities you even could imagine for yourself and the people around you. You began to dream differently, love differently, speak differently, regardless of the ways you may have tried to think your way out of it. And I'm willing to bet that over time, it wasn't just a well-thought-out essay or a perfectly reasoned argument. It wasn't just a YouTube video or a book on apologetics that saved you from your own despair. It was an encounter with the very same flesh they once told you was evil or ugly or unworthy, unlovable, unclean in the eyes of God. And something about that encounter pulled you back up and brought you to life. Because in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, yes, but the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, body, took on a name and a face, yes, and even a place, Nazareth, because God knows that the work of salvation, the work of liberation, is not just an intellectual, theological pursuit. It's not just a vision of something that happens when we die. It is a grounded moment in the truth and reality that we are beholden to one another here on this giant blue ball of earth and clay, water and dust. God sent this Jesus not just to condemn Nathanael, not to mock him, but to go to him, to meet him, encounter him, be proximate to him, and offer him a vision of what is to come, and in doing so, knock the dust right out of Nathanael's lungs, because yes, good things have always come from Nazareth. It's an encounter with Jesus that shakes loose the false narratives that have been holding Nathanael's ears to hear and mouth to speak captive. And it allows him to begin remembering what the world would rather forget, that yes, something good can come from Nazareth. Might he move through town differently the next time he travels? Might he interrogate the stories he's been told when he was younger again? Might he still ask questions, but critical ones this time? Listen, beloved, I am aware that so many of us are here this morning because we want to be closer to Jesus. We want to encounter the holy. We want transformation and revelation and liberation, and yet there is an entire intellectual and theological history behind us that has primed us to think our way into a relationship with Jesus. Like masterful scientists, many of us have been taught to consider the right formula of theological concepts, that work up against the world's hardest questions, that work up against our personal needs, that we shake them all up, and once we crack that equation, it's like we expect encounter. I expect to meet Jesus. But what we haven't been taught is that restless night you've had, knowing another election cycle is coming, that ache in your chest when your coworker, your friend, just lost another loved one and you didn't know what to say, that pit in your stomach about how you cannot speak about what is happening in Palestine because to do so would make it too present and real, and you've never seen something so horrifying in your lifetime, that these things might just be you running into Christ and having him shake loose those embedded narratives you were carrying, breaking open that muscle memory like reflexes that were causing you to resist your own liberation for so long, and showing you that there are new stories to uncover now, new worlds to inhabit, new people to hold, new histories to uncover and proclaim, not for knowledge's sake, but for the sake of the gospel, which is to say, for the sake of all of God's people. This is the work before us, beloved union. And it is to continue bearing witness in ways that do not allow us to forget one another, because we belong to each other. What matters to one of us matters for all of us. When God said that God would make good on God's promises, God did not mean that it was a promise meant for a favored few. God did not mean that it was a promise meant for only those who could read the Bible, or for those who have the most righteous opinions, or for those in the blessed US of A, but for all of God's people. Be encouraged this morning, beloved, that you are flesh just as Jesus of Nazareth was. Maybe not fully God like Jesus, but flesh with the courage to move through places and amongst people, unpacking the stories that they were told, the stories that they will try to speak about you, and they will try to get you to speak for them. Be vigilant, beloved, and be gentle with yourselves, remembering that we are creatures both of brain but of body, who move in ways that will not always liberate us. We are compelled not to see those who suffer because it keeps empire strong. But we are a gospel-loving people with a witness of our own. And when they try to sell us easy narratives and single-issue justice platforms like MLK, we will roll up our sleeves, we will seek a deeper soil. And like Nathaniel, we will know the gift of encounter when it frees us from any false narrative or assumption that would dehumanize, degrade, or subordinate the people of God. And so we pick up our Bible in one hand, our texts of theology, philosophy, literature, and poetry in the other, and we do the work to find one another again, to remember, to reinterpret, to re-envision what is possible after going too long without sight. And we confidently proclaim that contrary to what they have spoken, yes, good can come of this. May it be so. Amen.